No. Yeah. I mean,
Hi,
that's not her.
my name is Claire Olson and I'm an assistant professor here in the School of Architecture. And I'm pleased to welcome Audrey Matlock back to her alma mater. She graduated from SU with a Bachelor of Fine Arts and then went on to Yale to complete her Master's of Architecture. After completing her degree, she worked for some of the most prominent firms in the country, including Peter Eisenman and Richard Meyer, and then spent 7 years at Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, where she was senior designer on multiple skyscraper projects. She left SOM in 1990 to work as director of design at Perkins & Will, where she stayed until '93, which also happens to be the year that Matlock was featured in Jerry Adler's book High Rise. Included was an image of Matlock seated on a Ducati motorcycle with a relaxed grin, looking as though she could handle anything. It seems she could. That same year, and without any prospective projects, Matlock ventured out on her own and started Audrey Matlock Architect. Now, 16 years later, and 100 projects later, the firm has garnered national and international acclaim. The work has been featured in over 100 publications and has won dozens of awards. The recently completed Chelsea Modern alone has received 7 so far, including one from the AIA. The condominium high-rise was one of the first new constructions completed along the High Line. The folded glass facade reflects the changing sky, but through its tectonic expression, the building is solidly grounded. Program and user experience are a continual driver for Matlock. In the Chelsea Modern, operable windows allow natural ventilation, and floor-to-ceiling windows provide daylighting for the clean, richly modern interiors. In another recent project, a sports center located 7,000 miles away in Kazakhstan, we see the folded facade again, this time as a long-span roof embedded in the ground of an earthquake-prone landscape. The program and seismic requirements resulted in substantial trusses that were left exposed in celebration of the tectonic. This is structure announcing its presence in a manner that recalls Heidegger's thingness. It's simultaneously mass and frame, rooted to the earth, but cracked open to reveal the sky. Site was also a driver for the recently completed project, the Catskill Mountain House, where floor-to-ceiling windows dematerialize boundaries between inside and outside. It's a sort of case study house revisited, with high-end amenities such as heated concrete floors. In homage to the modernist master of inside-outside blurring, a Neutra-esque spider column supports the roof and extends into the landscape, a tectonic game that never bores. The grayscale tone of the interior, like a black and white photograph, is both unapologetically nostalgic and resolutely contemporary. The serene, muted plasticity of the interior shifts the gaze outside, where by contrast, the brilliant colors of the surrounding landscape become almost otherworldly. The refinement of the details reflects Matlock's unwavering commitment to build form and 30 years of experience. Her practice continues to grow with projects in the U.S. and abroad in Turkey, Kazakhstan, and Trinidad. She has taught and lectured throughout the U.S., and we are super pleased to have her here as a visiting critic this semester and to lecture for us tonight. Please join me in welcoming Audrey Matlock.
Wow, that was fabulous. I can't believe it. You did my whole lecture for me. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I am very pleased to be here. I have to say that I was an undergraduate student here, but not in the architecture school, in the fine arts school, many years ago. And although I spent a lot of time in Slocum Hall visiting my friends, thinking maybe one day I might go on and study architecture, I never imagined that I'd actually be back here teaching in the architecture school all these years later. So it's kind of an interesting kind of deja vu for me, walking around this campus, having had one experience and trying to understand this new experience and put them together. So anyway, I'm very, very pleased to be here. Can you all hear me? I'm not going to turn this on if I don't have to. I'm pretty loud, so. What's that? No.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, you want it on?
Yeah, they do a tape.
Oh, okay.
Your agent said it would be okay.
Is that on?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I must admit, at the time I was asked what the title for this lecture would be, I really hadn't focused on it. And I came up with the idea of maximum minimum, and I must admit, at part, it was because I felt it could probably cover just about any topic I would ever think of talking about. But also, it does rather refer to an approach or a strategy that I might take towards a project. For instance, a high-intensity urban site versus a more landscape-intensive site. So I guess in some ways, the idea of strategy is described by this title. Now I have been teaching here for, and I also want to refocus this a bit. Now that I've been teaching here for several weeks, I see through my students that establishing a starting point for a project can be very daunting. And this may not be reassuring, but I have to say after all these years, the starting point of a project continues to be quite daunting. So it's really at the beginning of a project, I believe, the very initial steps of a project, where we can most meaningfully influence change. And I think influencing change is something that is important for us as architects to do. It's here where we ask questions and test assumptions given to us by our clients and establish a position that we then go on to continue to test and to refine throughout the process. For me, the fundamental conditions of a site and the specific program of uses hold great creative potential for a project and often become the basis of a conceptual strategy for my buildings. Because I think these conditions are always unique, I don't think they're ever even repeated in part. And I think that a project that can grasp these potentially resonates with its site and its purpose in a way that might begin to transcend our familiar expectations. And that is something else that I feel we as architects, or I as an architect, believe is important. So I'm going to show a series of projects and try to talk a little bit about the strategy of each project. I've chosen kind of an array of projects from different parts of the world and from different project types, very different sites, and some in different stages of completion. The first of these is called Chelsea Modern. It's a housing project in the far west district of Chelsea in New York City. It's a former manufacturing district, for those of you who don't know it, which has been transitioning over the last 20 years into, if not the world center, a world center for contemporary art. And more recently, in the last, say, half dozen years, it's experienced a significant residential building boom. And this has caused very rapid change in both its density and its use. And this, I would say that it's developing an entire, almost new identity for this part of the city. And I saw this project as an opportunity to address issues beyond housing alone and to conceptually address this physical and cultural transition. Probably should have had that on. It was a little more interesting than that title. Now, this is a map that was from Architectural Record around the time, was published around the time that we started this project. And I'm showing it because it lists all of the projects that were planned to begin around the time that our project began. And I would say that since then, that may have even doubled. But what's most interesting about this is that the majority of the projects are either clustered along the High Line, and I don't know, for those of you who don't know what the High Line is, it's a former elevated railroad in New York City that was converted into a park by Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro, and field operations. And the other place that these buildings have tended to cluster is along the far west side, along the water. No, these are the blocks right around our exact site. We're the little blue dot. There, again, you can see the High Line and the waterfront. And I think what's important about this is for me, what was interesting about this was the rather exuberant diversity of building types that surrounded our project. Let's see if I can use my little pointer here. The red are townhouses. The yellow are other new large residential buildings. The gray are these low utilitarian buildings. Most of them are galleries. And then these brown buildings are housing projects, which are kind of unique to our exact site. They're not really throughout all of Chelsea. And it was this, and I think most important, most interesting to me was that we were a mid-block site. We weren't on the High Line, we weren't on the water, and we were actually mid-block. And it was this location that most influenced, I would say, my approach to this project. I wanted to explore the potential for an infill building to stitch this eclectic block rather than become a focal point. And so I wanted it to have a movement instead of being very static. And there's, I think, a quite powerful east-west axis here, sort of pulling one's focus towards the waterfront. And I was particularly interested in exploring a building concept that was about the experience of traversing that path. So our initial studies were primarily focused on development of a kinetic facade. It seemed that by slicing this facade into bands and by creating multiple folds in them, there was a kind of rhythmic tension that could be developed. And so these are some of our early studies. And also, an issue that we always come up against when we build in New York City are the zoning regulations. In New York, there are some pretty restrictive building regulations, and in this case, our building could not be above 120 feet in height, and at 85 feet, it had to have a setback. Now, this typically results in the traditional sort of New York City setback wedding cake form that I'm sure you're all very familiar with. And we were seeking an alternative response to this, where the setbacks did not so strongly define the form of the building. So this solution tended to be working for us in that regard as well. We also wanted to establish the least dimension that these bands could indent in from the street and still be effective visually. Every time we cut away from the street, we are losing buildable area, and that's completely unacceptable to any developer, certainly that I've worked with. So we did a series of these drawings at street level and determined that a 3-foot indentation would both maintain the dynamic character that we were looking for and also maintain the maximum bulk that could be built on this site. So here's a series of these little diagrams that map the visual experience along this street. And then these are the kinds of drawings that we do to make sure that our client is on board with where we're going. Actually, I think these more realistic drawings are very useful in our process. Now, another zoning regulation that we came up against was one that required that we locate housing at the ground level. Now, I think this was particularly problematic in this part of the city where there's a real vital commercial street life, and locating housing there really counters that activity. I mean, I really think it's a misplaced zoning that belongs somewhere in the village where there are rows of townhouses in stoops and trees, and I'm really not sure how that happened here, but we were required to incorporate this into our project. So we were seeking an as-of-right solution that would support the kind of art-related uses in this neighborhood. we came up with this idea of this duplex unit at the ground level that you would enter at ground and it would connect to the below grade. And they would be very high spaces and hopefully would appeal to someone who is looking for either studio workspace or for a private exhibition space in their homes. And as it turned out, that's in fact who did buy these. And so here you can see them. They're set back from the building line, and the face of these units are covered with a translucent channel glass. Most of the galleries in this area use a kind of translucent glass to filter the light into their spaces, and this kind of is kind of a reference to that. But it also creates a bit of privacy for the people who live there. And then again, the sidewalk is glass, and you can see from below. So this brings light into the lower levels. And then again, the entry is pulled out to the building line, so there's a separation created between where the rest of the owners enter their apartments and these ground floor units. So these units were designed to be very flexible, and we introduced these sliding walls wherever we could that abutted the exterior glass wall. And it was in hopes that, in addition to creating flexibility, the contour of this wall could also be experienced from the interior of the units. And this is just a view of one of the units. And also this kind of porosity that we were looking for wherever possible. On the upper units, we have stairs that connect directly to the roof through an operable skylight. And then, of course, the terrace is open to the entire city, and these occur where there's the setback. Now, a lot of things interest me about glass. You'll probably see that a lot of projects that I work on use glass. But one of the things that interests me is the multiple readings that one gets from glass. Here you can see with this folded planes on the front of the building that you get, rather than exact mirrored images, you get these kind of fractured images on the face of the building. And this is a view of the building early in the day where the sun penetrates deep into the building and it becomes quite transparent. And again at night, and we all know this, it's true with most buildings, when the lights are on, they're also transparent. And even with this dark glass, one sees right into the building. And then most of the time, the building is really quite opaque and reflective and I think much more sculptural. I think it's my sort of favorite time of the day for this building. And there is also this irregular composition that runs across the face of each of these bands. These lighter colored windows are actually clear within these blue bands. And the clear bands are where all of the operable windows are located. And you can see these operable windows push out from the face of the building on all four sides. So they get like double the airflow of a typical window. They're on a kind of accordion hinge. This is a technology that was developed by a German company, and we couldn't afford them. So we appropriated the technology and had these fabricated in Italy. I think it's the first application of this type of window in New York. That's just another close-up view of those windows. And here you can see the building in context. Now, we're currently working in 4 countries. And I think we had our first international job about 5 years ago. And I would say that since that time, my practice has changed in many ways as a result of it. We've had to become much more adaptable and have learned the importance of strong personal relationships in order to bridge the long distances. And I think it's been very rewarding for all of us, and it's opened a lot of doors to us culturally and made us more nimble, I think, as design thinkers and as problem solvers. I'm going to talk about some work that we've done in Kazakhstan, I think because it's the most culturally remote and has been the most challenging for us. Our projects have all been in and around the city of Almaty. Almaty is the main cultural center of Kazakhstan. It's in the southeast corner of the country, right over the border from China. Now, for most of its history, the territory of modern-day Kazakhstan has been inhabited by nomadic tribes without any real permanent architectural tradition, certainly in the realm of housing. See here, there's a yurt. They're still actually used quite a bit today in the steppes areas of Kazakhstan. Then around the middle of the last century, until 1991, Kazakhstan was part of the Soviet Union. And its permanent architectural traditions were, by and large, imported from the Soviet Union. So you see here these Soviet housing blocks, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. They look like the ones all over all of the former Soviet countries. And they were built in vast quantities in Kazakhstan in the 60s and 70s. And the other kind of housing, which I think of as being a more indigenous kind of housing, is this kind of makeshift shed. There actually were quite a few of these when I began going to Kazakhstan, and they're slowly disappearing. The land is becoming quite valuable, and it's being bought up by developers. But I think of this as their one indigenous single-family house, kind of an urban outgrowth of the yurt, the way that they drape layer upon layer of these tin roofs in order to keep them dry. And this is a fairly recent view of Almaty. There's a great desire for reinvention by the Kazakhs. But they don't really know where they should be looking for their inspiration. They don't know whether they should be looking east or looking west or looking backward or looking forward. And consequently, the recent development there is kind of a stylistic hash of buildings, which is neither routed in their tradition or in the environment. And I think this is kind of typical of a lot of these growth spurts that we're seeing in Eastern countries. Now, my client was part of a new sort of educated and prosperous class of people who he's well-traveled, he's cultured, and he's a real estate developer, so he has a great interest in architecture and in buildings. And he wanted to build a house for his family to embrace a healthy lifestyle and to engage extensively with the landscape. And furthermore, he wanted to challenge the poor grade of construction and architecture that exists in Kazakhstan. And he chose a site outside of the city in the nearby foothills of the Tianshan Mountains. These are the mountains that actually separate Kazakhstan from China. And this is the actual site. If you can see in the distance there's a view. It's the same view. It's just a different time of the year. But I wanted to show how steep this hillside is. It's in a severe earthquake zone with extremely poor soil conditions, and also on this extraordinarily steep slope. Now, the program for this house was very large. It was to accommodate a family of 5, maids, nannies, and several security guards. They're very concerned with their security in Kazakhstan. Now, our design strategy was designed from the modernist approach of turning programmatic requirements and site conditions into determinants for design. And we started with a series of these diagrams trying to understand this extreme slope and how we might occupy it and take advantage of the views at the same time. And we came up with this system of terraces that would link the interior and exterior spaces on all the various living levels. and also a series of walls that might anchor this building into the earth. So it was kind of a marriage of a spatial concept and a structural concept. And then underlying all of our decisions was a desire for all the main spaces to be facing the distant downhill views. It's just another view. And we did a series of these, but this probably most closely represents where we ended up. So the house is completely linear with all its main spaces overlooking, I think, as I mentioned, the downhill views. And the living level is raised. This is the main living level here. And it extends out into a rooftop terrace, which is over the pool. So there's this kind of datum through the center of the project, and it's a piano nobile project with one enters and goes up to the main house and down to this pool complex. The program for the house included, in addition to living spaces, a fairly large pool and spa, interior pool and spa complex. And here's a section which, again, shows you how extreme this slope is, and also that the ground level and the third level both connect with the land. So in this very thin section, you have a drop of 2 levels. And here we're looking at situating this actual house into the site. And we did a number of renderings to sort of study the landscape elements, particularly in the scale of landscape elements. I always find a bit daunting. As an architect, we're typically used to looking at interior spaces, and exterior spaces have such a different sort of scale that is successful. And so we did a number of renderings here to try to understand both the exterior spaces and the relationship of interior and exterior spaces. Also, given the scale, the size of this house, the breakdown of these terraces was really, really essential. This is a view from inside the house, looking back over towards the mountain range, from the pool towards a similar view. Now, here's a view of the house during construction. At the very beginning, we decided to build this project out of concrete. It's their typical building process and material in Kazakhstan. Everything's concrete, essentially, but it's usually very crude and covered up with some sort of stucco or some other sheathing. And we decided if we were going to build in concrete that we wanted to do an exposed concrete building. So this really became quite a challenge. We initially had to work with the local plants to get a color of concrete that was acceptable to have exposed. We got contractors from Turkey to oversee the construction work, the concrete work, while we used the local labor force to build it. And the forms came, I think, from Germany. Virtually nothing that we needed could be gotten within Kazakhstan, we quickly learned. It's just some of the terracing. Now, this is uphill, the back of the building, or the north side of the building, facing up the hill. Again, I think I mentioned how the poor quality of the soil and also the earthquake issues. And to stabilize the earth behind the house, we were required to put in these 15-foot-high concrete walls. I think that we put in 3 of them, and then anchored them with big steel anchors back into the hillsides, and then backfilled them with stable material. The actual house sat on 88 piles, which all went down to a depth of 20 meters. And the concrete work took over a year, I think around a year and a half to complete. They actually established a camp on site where the workers lived during that time, even in this winter weather. So this is the house pretty much completed. This was early this spring. And you can see how the house is really kind of surgically cut into the hillside now, and the landscape has begun to grow in. This is that lower terrace in front of the pool. All of the curtain wall was fabricated in Germany, but we had it installed by local installers. There was a lot of education that went on with this. Working with local people as much as we could, I think that really helped to bring the ability to build more sophisticated buildings, a couple of steps ahead. And again, it was important to our client, who, as I think I mentioned, was a real estate developer. And that's this is the main house. At the end is the master suite, which overhangs just sits free over the landscape. And that's standing on the terrace of the master bedroom suite, looking back. Again, on the roof terrace, looking at the house. And this is up above, like on the wall, looking over the various tiers. I think this probably describes best how that's all organized. Downhill of the house, we used just the basic landscape tier retaining walls in order to stabilize the earth. We didn't have to do this extravagant an engineering solution on this side of the house because it gets slightly less steep. We just ran these walls a little deeper than typically would. Now, you enter the house, you can either go up to the main house or down to the pool. So here's the entry condition. Or you can go to the right to this small courtyard, from which you can enter the private office of the owner. He has a whole office building for his offices, but he has a little home office that he wanted to keep very private from the rest of the house activities. This is on an upper level, again, looking out over the roof terrace. This is the bedroom level. These are all the children's bedrooms along the left side. There's a skylight and glass floor that brings light all the way down through the 3 levels. Now, there's a fairly high level of finish in this house, and we accomplished this by building everything. Basically, everything was prefabricated as much as possible, and we sort of designed the house to be prefabricated, and then everything was shipped to the site and installed. This is looking down toward the pool. Now, I said there was a whole complex, spa and pool complex. This is a Turkish bath. This is our kind of minimalist version of a traditional Turkish bath. It's technically built like a Turkish bath, but we made very simple, clean forms. The marble does come from Turkey, marble from Turkey, which they claim is the only marble that works in Turkish bath. We didn't test that theory. So this is the pool. The pool is all exposed concrete and teak flooring. This teak wall at the back is louvers with glass behind it, so bringing light into that spa area. Above, there's a skylight that washes down this concrete wall, which goes right down into the pool. These stripes along the wall are actually glass channels behind which are LED lights so that they illuminate the pool at night. This is a view the other way. You see the kind of lighting patterns that happen on this concrete wall. And you're looking back towards a retaining wall at the edge of the site. Those are those glass channels, again, which go between these double beams and then extend up into the retaining wall in the garden. So this is another Kazakhstan project. It's a community sports center It's the same client amongst, it was actually a group of clients. He was kind of the ringleader for this. And the site for this project is not too far away from the house. It's in the foothills as well, and it sits on the top of a plateau. So with these foothills rising around it, there's this small flat surface, and that's where we located, that was our site for the building. The program includes indoor and outdoor tennis courts, gymnasium, soccer field, game lawn, and hammams, and eating pavilion. It was actually a very, very simple program. Now, the project had a fairly large footprint, about 30,000 square feet or 3,000 square meters, and we wanted it to have a quiet presence and make a small as possible visual disturbance on the plateau. And also many views of this building were going to be from above, which is something that we took into consideration. So this sketch, I think, represents a desire to integrate the building into its site and its topography. The tennis court component of the program require very high ceilings, and as a result of that, we came up with the idea to depress these below grade to the degree that we could. And that would reduce the height of the building. Also, the vertical walls that are required around a tennis court would all be below grade so that only the roof was projecting above the ground plane. And these are some sort of transformational diagrams that we did. We created this kind of grain across the site. There is a little high point at the top of the plateau, which is where we located our building. And then a sort of recreational strip runs counter to that, runs through it. And you can see how the courts, that's the indoor court, and that's 3 meters below grade. The outdoor court is also depressed because we wanted to eliminate the requirement for any kind of walls above ground. And then these individual strips, which form the enclosure, sort of wrap over the top of the building. And we kind of likened these to sort of topographical lines in the landscape. And then this is just a sketch of that in situ. So we did these models where we pinned the two sides of the models and left them free so that we could manipulate the form. I mean, it was much more satisfying, we felt, than looking at it on the computer, which we started to do. But we were looking for a kind of rhythm that might represent tennis play or gymnastic movement. But at the same time, we wanted a profile that would maintain the angularity of the surrounding mountains. So this is a model that's fixed. On the top side, which is the south side, all of these roof strips are in a straight line. And on the side toward us, they're tuned to what is going on that side of the building. And we've pulled, the two that are pulled out the furthest here are creating protection for the entry to the building. And this is looking at that model the other way. These are all glass clear stories so that you can view the mountain range, which is in that direction. At the end of the building, there's an open pavilion, which faces the best views of the project. And that's, again, the pavilion. The plans, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. I just wanted to point out in general how this works. One enters, crosses to the top of a ramp, and then descends to the tennis courts. The hammams and all the services are down here. You can go outside and then access the other tennis court on the exterior. Above, it's the gymnasium and just observation platforms. And here's that dining pavilion. Now, the structure for this building was a very interesting part of this process. We were convinced from the very beginning that these individual strips should all be structured separately, that each roof element should be independent. And the engineers who we were working with completely disagreed with us, and they, no matter how many times how many ways we tried to put this to them, they could come back with these kinds of space frames where everything was all glued together. So we sort of persisted in studying possible ways that these might become independent and would take care of the sort of lateral issues that they were concerned with. And we came up with this triangulated truss that finally everyone agreed could work in the project. And these were also designed, go back to this, designed to be modules of 2, 3, 4, or 5, so that they could be easily fabricated. And the longest truss segment was the size that could be put on a truck and trucked here. That's the view over the gym, the entry. That's the pavilion and the play fields. And this is the building as it sits in the landscape. Now this is a project for Armstrong World Industries. They had planned to consolidate their facilities from three different locations onto their original research campus, which is in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and we were commissioned to do 3 of these buildings. The campus was originally campus plan was sort of co-developed by SOM and Dan Kiley, a landscape architect, back in the 1960s. The design consisted of 2 very simple elements. There's this very long entry drive, tree-lined entry drive, and this sort of pristine lawn that it terminates in. And then SOM built this building here, and soon after this is the engineering building, a design building was built here. And then the rest of this stuff just happened. All these sort of new roads sprung up, and buildings were just haphazardly placed around the site and became increasingly disjointed. So our new buildings constituted enough change that we could envision a revised plan for a more cohesive campus. And our goal was to create more pedestrian linkages, not more, there weren't any, to create pedestrian linkages and shared spaces and public sort of nodes of space. And to do this, in part, we married Kiley's formal landscape with a more informal landscape, which covers a much more sort of hilly part of the campus. And we did a number of buildings. We did 3 buildings and then a couple of renovations here. But I'm going to talk about one in particular, which is right here. This is a visitor center. It was called the Marketing Center and then later called the Visitor Center. It's the public face of Armstrong. And the goal is really to showcase their products. And the building was intended to project their commitment to design. And for those of you who don't know, Armstrong manufactures ceiling and floor surface products primarily. So this project was partly a renovation project and partly a new addition. So here was the building we had to work with. It presented a pretty poor image to the public. It was this sort of blank, concrete, tilt-up facade with this funny berm around it. It always reminded me of kind of a big bushy mustache trying to hide some bad dental work. And it was entered around the side. So its visibility from the main drive, which was key to this building, virtually was non-existent. So we did a series of studies to see how we might take the idea of surface and make this the kind of theme of this building. And we looked at ways that we might stretch or fold or drape these surfaces in order to mask the existing building and also to integrate it with the new. And we were also looking for ways that this surface might control transparency and the filtration, light filtration into the interiors, presentation spaces and gallery spaces. And these sections were very useful for us to study the. First, we adopted the idea of an art gallery with its high ceilings and natural light and the flexibility that it offers as our kind of model for this interior space. And we sliced and I feel like we sliced and diced these things. It was a very modular kind of construction. It was easy to cut pieces out of, raise pieces, eliminate pieces, et cetera. So we sort of cut up this envelope to get more ceiling height and connectivity between spaces, and also modify the roof lines to some degree. And most importantly, to introduce natural light into the deeper spaces. And then simultaneously, we were studying how this building might sit into its site and might start to remedy some of the problems that existed immediately around it, i.e. visibility, and create a greater visibility to the building and a connectivity to the neighboring Commons building, which is right there. And then we wanted to expose the structure of this building, both to raise the ceiling height, but also to reintroduce the building's original industrial history. And we had an idea about how the exhibits might fit into this building, and we wanted to integrate them with the architecture. So the actual building walls might not only exhibit the materials, but exhibit what you can do with form with these materials. That didn't really end up happening. Armstrong decided they wanted to just build some little freestanding exhibits and change them on a regular basis. So we ended up with a more sort of neutral gallery kind of space. So this is a completed space from just inside of the entry. That's a view of one of the skylights cut into the roof. This is a presentation space which cantilevers over a double height space. And we also wanted to use their materials in unexpected ways, maybe introducing new possibilities for them. So here, these are acoustic ceiling panels, perforated wooden ceiling panels that we use for these railings. And then in a gesture, we wanted to entirely transform the building's solidity. So we wrapped the entire concrete shell in a layer of perforated aluminum. And it was a simple strategy that would highlight the entry while announcing the company's identity. It's really one continuous folding surface. And at the far end, these glass sunshades, they're translucent glass sunshades that sit over a clear glass openings. This is facing west, so that filters the daylight. Another view. And then where we've set the perforated skin off from the building so that light can penetrate between them, so it becomes more diaphanous and more transparent. And here where it overshoots the building, extends beyond the building, it's got its own independent structure. And then where you see through that, where there's no building behind it, above and at the ends, it kind of highlights the landscape and also the sky. So this project was an invited competition for a building for the Museum of Women. And this was a couple of years back. The site for this project was at the south end of Battery Park City in New York. So that's almost to the southern tip of Manhattan. This is the Hudson River. This is Battery Park, which stretches all the way up this side of Manhattan until it reaches the West Side Park. The program called for a museum of women's history and also for a leadership center, which was kind of an educational facility. And the total square footage was around 200,000. So it's a pretty big building. And we decided at the onset of this project that this particular subject matter required a museum paradigm that reflected both the exhibits and the architecture. And we asked a couple of questions of ourselves. How can a museum of women challenge tradition and provoke change? And how can a museum of women portray the characteristics of leadership, creativity, and innovation on a site constrained by zoning regulations and archaic stylistic precedents? And that refers to some zoning regulations on this site that were imposed by Battery Park City, that all buildings would be made of brick, all buildings would have cornices, and all buildings would have stone bases. So we obviously, at the very beginning, decided to take issue with this. And began with a theory that a museum's organizational strategy gives meaning to its contents. An example is that traditionally museums have reinforced this view of history as chronological, hierarchical, and categorical. One of the earliest recorded museums in the Roman Forum chose a basilica form to exhibit their war booty. And this particular building type dictated the items were viewed in a particular sequence, a linear sequence in a very stringent order. Now, today, this museum organization strategy is considered by many museum historicists to descend from a male view of history. So we didn't completely invent that idea. But we were seeking a new movement and spatial paradigm to describe women's history, one that portrays a weave or kind of an overlap of historical events. And we were searching for a way to insert this organizational principle onto a rather small footprint, which was going to result in an uncharacteristically tall museum. The size of our site and the size of our program were really requiring this. These are a bunch of model studies that we did, and then these studies that we did on the computer, where we began to develop this continuous loop of circulation that would loop through the main galleries and then connect to maybe special galleries on every other level. And it would allow various ways to get in and out of this loop. So it was really about this kind of mix or weave of events simultaneously, as opposed to clearly ordering them. And also the potential for these kind of overlapping spaces and what that might produce. Now this is the ground floor plan. The entry of this building is from the corner. Specifically, not a central entry, an axial entry, a big statement entry. In fact, it slides between a layer of glass on the side. So it was intentionally turning its back on a kind of axial hierarchy in this building, and sort of starting one on that sort of looping path. That's where the entry is. Here again, along this projection wall. And here you're inside, and you loop around and start on that path. Here's the typical galleries. So here's the main gallery, and then here's either these are where the double height galleries are. So they're either open or smaller spaces where one could have special exhibits. Whenever you reach the top of the stairs, you're always viewing this. It was very hard, given where this building was sited, not to in some way incorporate the Statue of Liberty into this. We weren't the only one. I think we realized that like almost every scheme had some nod to Lady Liberty. And the Leadership Center that I mentioned is on top of the building. It functions somewhat separately from the museum, but in concept they're related. And here it has a separate entry. Now, a similar spatial concept also engages the exterior elements of the building. There's kind of a landscape ramp stair, and I say landscape because it connects to, this is the landscape of Battery Park City here, and our ramp starts here, and it connects to a roof garden on the rear setback of our site. And another thing it accomplishes for us, similar to what we were looking to do in the Chelsea Modern project, is not have an overt setback at the side of the building. So whereas we decided not to incorporate the Battery Park City zoning regulations, we did incorporate the city's zoning regulations. So this kind of winding setback, again, mitigates that stepping kind of form. Here you can see how it comes up around. And now we're looking down on that garden and looking up from the inside. Those stone bands are commemorating important events in women's history. It's also very interesting that this is sloped down looking into the gallery rather than looking up and out. Here's overlooking from one of the galleries. So again, we intentionally ignored the zoning restrictions because we strongly disagreed with them. And the building was designed as a dual facade. It acts both as a sculptural wrapper to the building and a sustainable system for heating and cooling. And it gave us just complete freedom in how we wanted to shape the facade of this building. We felt it was more important that it represent innovation and leadership and beauty than be a nod to the past. And then you can access it behind this wall for maintenance. The top of the building, the Leadership Center, has these glass louvers as a second skin, and those are automated. So they can change their angles, and they're also accessed from a gap in between. These are just overviews of the building. Now, sadly, this project, after putting us all through like 3 stages of competition, the money that was set aside for this project got diverted to some of the post 9/11 projects. So it's unlikely that this will ever be built. And this is just a short project. I'm going to show this very quickly. This is a project that's in construction right now. It's called Irving Place. It's another New York City residential project, but very, very different from our other residential project. It's sited on the edge of Gramercy Park's historic district, which is a beloved part of the city, has some of the most beautiful masonry buildings in the city. The scale and texture of these buildings and the very thoughtful detail that these buildings employed were inspirational to our approach to this project. So our interest was to translate these concepts into a building that was totally contemporary and use its materials and technology, in its use of materials and technology. Using glass as our predominant material, the project adopts a vocabulary of transparent planes and steel detailing to create a kind of complexity of form and light similar to the surrounding buildings. And we were intent on designing what we called a living facade, where the internal planning concepts would give shape to the face of the building. Actually, it's probably best shown here. These 1- and 2-story projections occur at dining and living spaces, and they shift locations as the interior plans dictate. And these projections are sheathed in a low iron glass that has a digitized cloud pattern in white ceramic. So while filtering direct light, the frit pattern will create privacy from views into the apartments. And the clouds appear to be flowing across the building as the adjacent curtain wall reflects the actual sky above. Again, we incorporated these 360 to the projection windows, but this time they were much larger. They were 5 feet by 11 feet, so they're automated electronically. And the ground level has a garage for that unit, and the door is also automated. It slides on the left here. And there's an operable rear wall opening to a private garden. And a pool at the lower level. These, in contrast to, again, to the Chelsea Modern, are very opulent apartments. I don't dare show you the inside. They're pretty over the top. And here's a view under construction. They're just putting in the curtain wall now. And that's my last slide. Thank you very much.
So we have time for just a couple questions before we adjourn to the exhibition reception downstairs. Please wait for the microphones to circulate if you have a question. Okay.
Good.